gone against the grain, so to speak, but I guess in the late 19th, early 20th century, the most famous of them were the post-impressionists. People like Van Gogh, Munch, Gauguin, who were trying to find a way to visualize feelings, emotions, sensations, things that were not visible. They didn't like Impressionism because it was looking at the world and trying to interpret what was visible, what was seen, especially using light, trying to translate light into a painterly medium. But the post-impressionists and the fauve, the wild beasts who followed them, notably Matisse, wanted to do something that was more subjective, that was not about what you saw, but about what you felt about what you saw. So that is really intangible, of course. It varies from person to person. It has an emotional, subjective, intuitive component. And how do you translate that into visual terms using just paint or some other medium that is basically a flat surface? So for them, the way to do it was to distort, that the distortions had a more emotional character to them. And of course, they were roundly criticized for this. The term les fauves, which was applied to them in Paris, was not a compliment. It means wild beasts, and the people who were describing it in those terms felt that they were just splashing paint around and making a mess, and that it was a violation of all the standards and mores of the time. And of course it was. They weren't wrong about that. Expressionism as a movement was actually born in Germany. And the first manifestations were in around 1905 in Dresden, when a group called Der Brücke, the bridge, was founded by Haeckel, Kirchner, and Schmidt-Rottluff and others. And they were very anti-academic, and they actually looked back to the folk traditions of the so-called primitive artists who had no professional training. And in fact, they had no professional training either. Their work, of course, was very controversial, and they rejected the whole concept of bourgeois society and people collecting art in a very high-minded way. They wanted to get down below the surface and not deal with surface appearance, but deal with the emotional undercurrents. There was another group in Germany a little bit later, Der Blaureiter, that was actually led by Kandinsky, a Russian painter, whose work was later described as abstract expressionism by Alfred Barr in New York, in Wellesley College. That was the first use of it, 1929, when he applied that term to Kandinsky's work. But the actual coinage of abstract expressionism was much earlier, was in 1919 in a magazine in Berlin. And the writer, Oswald Herzog, he was reacting against figurative expressionism, as if that wasn't wild enough. He felt that that was already bourgeois and that art really should be about spiritual matters. He was picking up on Kandinsky, and his argument was that the intangible dimension, what you might say, the way that music expresses emotion, that art should be analogous to that, and that it should be pure creation. It should be non-objective. It should not have an outer stimulus. It should have an inner stimulus, and then you would invent the means to make that visible. Well, of course, that's what technology enables us to do. I mean, Colin can explain it much better than I, because after all, he coined the term Techspressionism. But the idea was to use the technological means available to us today in the 21st century to achieve these ends, to get a subjective emotional content into your art using the latest means available. So I'm going to turn it over to Colin, or are you going to, I'm going to give it back to Joyce first, and then she will introduce Colin.
Let's focus now on the national landmark here in East Hampton, New York, the home and studio of Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, who are two of the most famous abstract expressionists, painting here in the 1940s and 50s, among other abstract expressionists, and each artist had his or her own style and own technique. Now, with Pollock, as Helen Harrison said, he said that my method is direct, and I would say it's a simple technology, right? Now, we usually take the paintbrush for granted. The paintbrush is a technology that was invented, and some people say it was invented 300 BC in China, and then it was brought over to Italy. Well, Pollock rejected the paintbrush. So that's really radical. Pollock is known for drip painting. So Pollock is not actually touching the painting physically. He's dripping paint above the artwork, placing it on the floor so that gravity pulls the paint down. He's an action painter. He's moving all around the canvas as he works, and his movement is captured by the flow, the literal flow of the paint. So the technology is really personal. It's really felt. As Helen said, it's coming directly from his inner world and being expressed onto the canvas. He's not working from a sketch or a preconceived idea. So it's deeply personal and deeply intuitive and felt. That's not to say the technique is simple, but that's not to say that the paintings are simple. The paintings and the compositions are actually complex. So here he is, as I said, you could see he's an action painter. He's even stepping into the painting. And he said, I want to feel like I'm in the painting. So there he goes. He actually is in it. And it's a very athletic movement, almost like a dance. And here's an example of his iconic drip painting. And you can see it's very, the paintings that most people, remember him by are very large and 100% abstract. He's not copying anything outside of himself, although it might remind you of different aspects of nature or emotions. This one is called Autumn Rhythm, but Pollock did not start out with the title Autumn Rhythm and then paint it. He would title his paintings after they were done, or sometimes people would even give him suggestions. What I love about this painting is the viewer is looking at the painting and she becomes part of the artwork. In modern art, the viewer completes the painting because the interpretation is completely subjective. It's all about your perception. So there's Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock's wife. She was responsible for managing his career, and she did a great job at that. And that helped him become famous in his own lifetime. And she put her own career on the back burner to promote his career, but she always continued painting. And she painted in the Barn studio, where I'm going to take you in a moment. She's also an action painter, and her technology is also very direct. She sometimes got up on a ladder, but she didn't really prefer that. She wanted to use her whole body like a dance. And there was a level of spontaneity, right? And you're one with the painting. You don't have a plan. So if you get up on a ladder, it kind of interrupts the flow. So these are examples of her action painting. And here's an unusual technique that she used, where she would rip up her old paintings, glue them in a new composition to create a collage, and then paint back into them. This one is called The City. She would also cut up her paintings and use those elements as well. So these are two artists who are, in my opinion, I don't know, maybe I was going to say the best, but I can't really qualify it. But I would say, for me personally, they serve as an example of what is creative thinking, right? And Colin is going to show us his creative thinking and how he took the abstract expressionist ideas of this very personal, direct way of painting and combined that with really high-end technology, digital technology and whatnot. So all this happened right here in this barn in East Hampton, New York. So I'm going to show you around the barn. Okay. I know there are people from all sorts of places in the world. So before I show you the interior of the barn, I do want to step outside so that you can see how beautiful the property is and get a feeling of the actual location. So we are located on the end of Long Island, 90 miles from New York City. Perfect for an artist because you could hop on a train and be right here. And then go back to New York City. Whoa, windy. So Pollock and Krasner moved here from New York City. This is the Springs. This was fishermen and farmers.
Fine art one and one for clothing.
The barn was originally over there. Somebody's unmuted.
Actually, this is only used for the fine arts last time.
Whoa. Or is that? No. Okay. And here's the barn where I was just sitting in.
Because
Okay.
your prints don't say health of the planet.
Yeah, but they don't have to say health of the planet.
Here's the
Last
house.
time we just
We
submitted
might go
JPEGs
into
of
the
some
house
X-ray
at the
flowers.
end, but the
So there's some
focus
Health
of
of the
this
Planet series.
tour is on
Or
process. So we're going to mainly stay inside the
for
barn.
the fine art ones? Okay.
Okay, so what's special when you come to visit the Pollock site is that everything is not roped off. You can actually walk right into the barn and see where Pollock and Krasner's masterpieces were made. So I'm going to put on these little foam slippers and we're going to have a walkthrough. Now, Pollock and Krasner did not paint in the barn at the same time. Jackson Pollock died at the age of 44 in 1956 in a car crash. He was driving and drinking. And Lee Krasner used the studio after his death. Before his death, she painted in a little room upstairs. So many of these supplies you see behind me are actually Lee Krasner's because she was here until 1984. So here is her painting cart, her slippers. And here is the now famous barn studio. So you can see Jackson Pollock's drip painted floor, evidence of his masterpieces. And this floor is not a work of art because Pollock was very intentional about his paintings and his technique. These are just accidental random spills and splatters. But it's a lot of fun to come in here and just look at the floor. It's just fun. And also it really gives you an idea of the process rather than the end product, you know, hanging in a museum where it's so pristine. You get a feeling of trial and error when you come in here. And of course, also the nature that surrounded them. And although they didn't copy nature, it did give them inspiration. And we have historic photos on the wall like this one, taken by Hans Namath. And I'm going to show you a video by the same photographer, filmmaker, of Pollock actually painting and speaking about his technique. So very unusual, he's not using art paint, he's using house paint. And when he would use the brush, he would use it more like a stick, letting the paint flow off the brush. He also used basters that you cook with, and he would squirt the paint from the basters. So new technology. And he would use the stirrer as a tool to drip the paint as well. Now, this is not to say that Pollock never in his career used a brush. That's not true. He started off painting representational things you can see, working at the Art Students League with Tom Benton, painting traditional subjects. And gradually he moved into the realm of imagination and abstract art, gesture, and then gradually eliminated the paintbrush. But he did return to it in some of his artworks after he did the pure drip painting. Okay, so I would like to show you a video of Pollock so you can get an idea of his technique, and let's hear from him what he has to say about his technology. So I'm going to do a little screen share. Bear with me. And here we go.
My home is in Springs, East Hampton, Long Island. I was born in Cody, Wyoming, 39 years ago. In New York, I spent 2 years at the Art Students League with Tom Benton. He was a strong personality to react against. This was in 1929. I don't work from drawings or color sketches. My painting is direct. I usually paint on the floor. I enjoy working on a large canvas. I feel more at home, more at ease in a big area. Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more a part of the painting. This way I can walk around it, work from all four sides, and be in the painting, similar to the Indian sand painters of the West. Sometimes I use a brush, but often prefer using a stick. Sometimes I pour the paint straight out of the can. I like to use a dripping fluid paint. I also use sand, broken glass, pebbles, string, nails, or other foreign matter. A method of painting is a natural growth out of a need. I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement.
We are going to.
When I am painting, I have a general notion as to what I am about.
We're going to stop there because I want to make time for everything. You can find that video on YouTube. It's by Hans Namath, and there's another video of Pollock painting in the barn as well, which has no sound, which is more authentic than the one that you just saw, because that video was a little more staged. In day-to-day life, Pollock did not paint outdoors. He painted in the barn, okay? So let's see. Here is one of Pollock's finished paintings, which there are many, but this is one of my favorites. Hang on a minute. So Pollock said, I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. What does that mean? In your opinion, what feeling could this show? Or anything else that you see? How about Colin? We'll take Colin. What do you see in this one, Colin? You want to unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. And there's no right or wrong answer. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but there's no right or wrong answers. Everybody sees it completely differently.
Yeah, I mean, that piece, it seems a little more light and lively than a lot of his other work. I haven't actually seen that one, but the choice of colors, you know, makes me think of springtime, you know, a little bit of sort of, you know, an optimistic feeling, I think.
Yeah. How about, I see someone with the hand up. You have like a purple item on your head. What would you like to say? Unmute, please.
I see a decomposing forest floor.
Yeah. I see ice skaters, but the ice skaters aren't there. I see the movement that they made on the ice. So that's what I meant when I said the viewer completes the painting. It's truly subjective, which is what these modern artists were aiming for, okay? So I want to go back into the studio and tell you a little more about Lee Krasner, and also the mystery of why is this floor Pollock's if Lee Krasner was painting in here till 1984, why isn't it her floor? Okay, so here's a picture of Lee in the studio. As I said, after 1 year after Pollock's death, she moved into here and she painted her initial grief and bereavement. And then you start to see her paintings become more colorful, bright colors, sometimes inspired by nature, floral. It suggests floral patterns in a very abstract way. So you could see all the artworks behind her there. Those were painted on the wall here, you see? See her drips and splatters. In fact, the one that I showed you in the photo, she painted right here. Now, before this couple died, they had covered up the floors, okay? So when Lee was working in here, the floor was covered with white boards. And then after her death in 1984, the museum conservators came in here, peeled off the boards, and underneath was Pollock's floor preserved forever. This was taken in 1987. Lee arranged before her death that this would become a museum and a study center run under the auspices of Stony Brook University. Okay, so what does this have to do with technology? I want to show you, I don't actually need the mask anymore. I want to show you a really, really quick PowerPoint presentation to show you how artists following the abstract expressionists integrate technology with painting. So when we're using the term technology for this talk today, we're not really including video art and movies and things of that nature. We're really talking more about a narrower subject about how does painting meet with technology, okay? And this is a broad topic, so these are just examples to open up our creative thinking. So, of course, many artists use projectors, and this is it's just an interesting story that most people don't know about. Willem de Kooning had this projector, and he lent it to the painter Franz Klein. And Klein actually used this projector to create these abstract images that were actually derived from images of chairs, and in particular, rocking chairs. So you would look at this painting, and I would look at it and think, this is just complete spontaneity, right? This is just coming right out of the artist. But it actually combined technology with the artist's mark. And there's an example of the finished painting. This is the artist Robert Rauschenberg, who's working in the 1950s in New York City. And you can see in this photo, he's starting to integrate into the paintings very unusual materials, found objects. He created combines where he would make sculptures using all sorts of things he found on the street. And he would also silkscreen or transfer images onto the painting. This is later in his life, he moved to Florida. So here's an example where you could see, similar to the abstract expressionists, you see the artist's mark, right? You see the brushing, you see the dripping, but you also see layered into the painting, silk-screened images. So Rauschenberg is actually combining popular culture, images from magazines and newspapers, with this very, very personal aspect of the paint, the expressionist paint coming out of the artist, like Helen Harrison was saying. He's considered a pop artist in some ways because he is using popular culture. Now we have Andy Warhol, who is really, in my opinion, the polar opposite of a Jackson Pollock, because he really is not speaking about his emotions or even the artist's mark. He's silk screening at times images onto the painting, or eventually creating silk screens that is the art, the print itself. And he had the factory in New York City where many artists would collaborate with him. Okay, not only did he make paintings and prints, but he also is known for films and performance art, all sorts of things. But what's interesting about Warhol, if you picture Pollock, he's alone in the barn. It's highly individualistic. There's no one intervening. He is one with the painting. Andy Warhol is breaking with that idea of the abstract expressionist. It's not about individual expression anymore. It's about collaboration and popular culture. So this is at the Museum of Modern Art, where he painted the background gold and then silkscreened Marilyn Monroe's face onto the painting. And he could change the background. He did this in a series with different colors in the background. So you could make multiples this way. Eventually, he doesn't even paint into it. It becomes pure printmaking. And he's calling attention to the printmaking here, right? You could see the variations of the print. And we all know, I think, these iconic images of Marilyn Monroe created by Warhol. And of course, he did many celebrities and things that were very popular at the time, like the famous Campbell's soup can. So Warhol is actually questioning this idea of the artist's mark. And he has no problem saying art is business and business is art. And make multiples. He could design it, but he doesn't have to actually be in the studio creating the image, okay? These are great examples by David Hockney, the famous painter. Years ago at the Met, it was pretty radical to see iPad drawings alongside his paintings in his retrospective. But look at how much leverage, you could say, or how much mark making he got out of the iPad. It looks as if he's actually using a brush or a pencil. You can see the artist's mark even though it's an iPad. This one is even done on an iPhone. He did many, many drawings on the iPhone. So to bring it up to date, this is Eunice Golden living and working in East Hampton. And I love Eunice for many reasons, but one of them is Eunice is older now. She is always reinventing herself. So technology is not just for young people or the new generation. So Eunice, working from her painting, digitized it, and then created these new artworks that completely stand on their own, changing the colors, changing the composition, and so on. Okay? So those are just little tidbits of, well, not tidbits, Andy Warhol and these artists, but the subject is so broad. So those are just some key ideas. Now, we do have with us today Colin Goldberg, and it is an honor. He's going to tour us through a studio on the North Fork of Long Island. And Colin coined the term Techspressionism in 2011, and he'll tell us more about that. And he's going to share his website with us and his images. And Colin also was the recipient of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center foundation grant. And he has a very personal relationship with the Pollock Krasner House. So he's the perfect fit for this talk. So Colin, would you like to take it away? What just happened? Okay, done with that. Okay, so Colin, whenever you're ready, I'll spotlight you.
Okay. Great. So I guess I will just open up with a thank you. Thank you, Joyce, for inviting me to come on this Zoom and talk a little bit. And I'd like to also thank Helen, for her support in what we're doing with Techspressionism. She actually was the first person to write about it back in 2011. I actually came up with a term as a title for a solo show that I did out in Southampton at 4 North Main Gallery, which is now Peter Marcel's space. But back then it was basically a gallery that artists could do self-produced shows at. And for many years, I used that term to describe my own work, and Helen actually wrote a catalog essay for that show, which was really the first written reference to Techspressionism. And since then, she's really helped me, develop it into something that's become broader. And I'm just going to share my screen really quickly here. Okay, great. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this definition, an artist of Techspression is an artistic approach in which technology is utilized as a means to express emotional experience, is something that Helen helped craft as part of an artist group that really started last year. And it kind of started when I saw that other artists had started to use the term to describe their work. And I kind of teamed up initially with an artist that I had worked for out in the East End as a studio assistant named Steve Miller, and ran the idea by him of turning it into sort of like an artist community online based around the concept. And he liked the idea, and I ran it by Helen, and she proposed putting together a show to attract other artists. So at this point, and this is about a year ago, maybe actually less than a year ago, last summer. At this point, it's grown to about 210 artists from 35 countries, I believe, at this point. And we have a site up at techspressionism.com with all the different artists. And I just wanted to share this last piece of news that I got about a week and a half ago. We put a proposal into the Southampton Arts Center, which is the old Parish Art Museum space in Southampton Village, and that location, Southampton Arts Center, is going to be it's going to host the world's first physical group exhibition of Techspressionist works. It's going to open up in April 2022 and run through June or July of that year. So that's a very exciting project that I'm going to be co-curating with an artist named Ann Spalter, who's also a writer and a collector. She actually taught the very first digital classes at Rhode Island School of Design and Brown University, and wrote a book called The Computer and the Visual Arts. And Ann actually also, Ann and Michael Spalter have a private collection of digital work, which is the world's largest private collection of digital art. And that show is going to include selections from that collection going back to the 1950s. So it's really going to span the full historical spectrum of how the computer has been used within a fine art context. So I'm very excited about that and look forward to it. And we have a couple other online shows that are going to be happening prior to that physical exhibition in 22. But you could check out techspressionism.com. We also basically used Instagram as a way to locate our artists by asking artists to use a hashtag who are interested in the concept and relate to the concept. And at this point, actually last weekend, we just hit 10,000 posts of artists around the world using the hashtag, which is pretty exciting. So to relate it back to my work and how it relates to Pollock, I had first been to the Pollock house when I was an undergraduate student, and actually met Helen through her husband, Roy Nicholson, who's an amazing painter, and he was the head of the art department at Southampton College, where my father taught for many years. I grew up out in the East End of Long Island. So I did an internship as an undergraduate student, and Roy was my advisor, and he actually connected me to Steve Miller, who I worked for as a studio assistant. And that was my first experience working with a practicing artist. And it was also a really amazing experience. I got to learn silkscreen printing and worked alongside another assistant named Robert Barden, who printed for Andy Warhol for many years. And Steve is part of the Techspressionist group as well. So this is a video of me creating a ground, which is basically India ink on linen. And it directly relates, I think, to the way that Pollock talked about direct painting. And I also generally work horizontally when I'm painting grounds. It's not always oil paint. It's not always India ink. Rather, sometimes I use oil paints or acrylics, and some of those media I actually do paint vertically, like in a traditional way. But this particular medium, I paint on the ground to have this sort of liquid approach. And then once basically the ink dries, I photograph the ground and I import the photograph into my computer. And this piece in particular is part of a series of paintings that are about COVID. And they were inspired by a trip that I took with my wife and our 6-year-old daughter to get tested about a year ago, early on in the pandemic. So I took a bunch of photographs. Much to my wife's chagrin, she thought we were going to get in trouble for me taking pictures. But I thought it was just remarkable to see. So these are the finished pieces, and just seeing these guys in camo and white tents, it just felt extremely surreal, and it made a big impact on me. And I was a little hesitant to incorporate this content into paintings, but it actually helped me process the really complicated emotions that were happening at the time I was, experiencing this. And this work also relates to some of the work that Joyce was showing that Rauschenberg and Warhol did in terms of incorporating photographic imagery. And these images are printed directly onto the painted surface. So what I did to create these was I actually masked off areas with tape and painted white gesso on top of the areas that I was going to be printing the photographic material onto. And then I ran it through my printer essentially. And that's generally how I produce my work, is I paint and then I print on top of it using a large format printer. This is a 44-inch Epson that I actually purchased with funds that I got from the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant back in 2014. And the vast majority of my work is uses this piece of hardware in the production. These are some small studies for the larger pieces there. And then related to the story about Franz Klein, which is one of my favorites in terms of how technology is used in art. This is one of a series of drawings that I did. This is a pencil drawing. It's about 30 by 22 that was created using a projector. And the form was drawn digitally in Adobe Illustrator using sort of wireframe tools, and then projected, and then I executed it as a pencil drawing by hand. So this piece, Pollock's Floor, was actually based on pictures that I took on one of my very first visits to the Pollock house. And you can see it's repeated, the floorboards in perspective repeated 6 times. And then there's drips, which is sort of a direct reference to Pollock, as well as some spray enamel and graphite drawing. Sadly, like this piece and a bunch of the other work that I did when I was an undergrad was lost, but it was documented, and a print of it actually resides in the permanent collection of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center. This is another piece from that series called In Process, which is incorporates the floorboard image as well as a picture that I took of Pollock's grave, which is a big glacial erratic boulder that's located in East Hampton. And this is also a direct stylistic reference to Warhol in terms of the repeated photographic image. In Process is a little bit of a pun, a visual pun. It's not quite CMYK process printing, but that's the idea. And I also, come from a background where, like Warhol, a lot of my initial training was in commercial art. I know that he did commercial illustration. I've worked within commercial design pretty much since I graduated as an undergrad. I was a painting student at Binghamton, and I actually attended Southampton Public Schools. So I had a great art teacher out there in Southampton, Bob Muehlenhausen, who anyone who went to Southampton High School would remember fondly, and he's part of our Techspressionist group as well. He actually incorporates photographic content into his paintings. And then this piece is one of the first pieces that I actually incorporated inkjet printing directly onto a painted surface. And this is in the permanent collection. This particular painting is in the permanent collection of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center. And you can sort of see an obscured image of Pollock's barn there. And this is actually a boulder in his backyard. And the paint is this sort of latex paint that's also a house paint similar to Pollock. That particular type of paint seemed to take the inkjet print pretty nicely, and there's a resin top coat on it. And this is sort of a more recent piece from that series called Photo Constructs, which are very similar in terms of the combination of photograph and painting to what Rauschenberg was doing, but none of the work is, none of the imagery is appropriated. That is, all of the imagery from my paintings that incorporate photographs are my photographs and generally reference either a particular feeling, like these all sort of have sort of a, just a Zen feeling to them, contemplative, with images of clouds and different images of natural phenomena like waves. And then some of the photographic content directly references life events like my visit to the Pollock House, for instance. This is a recent piece that I'm going to show in the studio called Invictus. And this incorporates probably 6 layers of print and paint onto it. There's multiple layers of print and paint. And I see some drawing on the screen there. That's odd. But
excuse me, Colin, I'm sorry. Whoever is drawing on the screen, I'm assuming you're doing it by mistake. So just be aware and please stop drawing on the screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure even how that's possible, but at any rate, this piece basically references a poem by, I believe, William Henley is the poet's name, that my father had been reciting prior to his passing. He actually passed away last week, and the work was created over the course of a time period where he was suffering from dementia. So, like Pollock, I feel that my work doesn't illustrate my feelings, it sort of expresses my feelings. And I studied under an abstract expressionist painter by the name of Angelo Ippolito when I was at Binghamton. He was a second generation Abex painter that was originally from Italy. And he used to say that his work was about paint, and that it was somebody else's job to figure out what it was about, and I actually really liked that explanation. A lot of times when I was in graduate school, we would have critiques, and I would say, well, my work is about my process. It's process oriented. And a lot of the students, my colleagues, they weren't accepting of that. They wanted me to give an explanation. And honestly, like I don't have one for the most part. It's work that's about how I feel and what I want to see in front of me. Other than that, it's sort of open to interpretation. And I like the idea of the viewer completing the work. So that's pretty much it. This is one last thing. So this is a piece that I'm actually going to be showing at Guildhall in the members show. I'm actually dropping it off over there this weekend. But this is, I brought this up just to show you a little bit of my process. So I stretch the piece at the end, and like Pollock, I title it after it's done. But this piece is called David and Noguchi, and it kind of references my heritage. My mom is of Japanese ancestry, and her mother's maiden name is actually Noguchi. I don't have any reason to believe I have a blood relationship to Isamu Noguchi. I'd like to think that I might, but I don't know that. I do really respect his work. And then there is a Star of David actually abstracted out of it. My dad is of Jewish ancestry, and my wife's nephew, when my wife Donna and I first met, used to ask her when she was going to give that Japanese guy a call, which I thought was always really funny. But it references sort of like my mixed ethnicity in some ways. And then this is sort of to show you. So this layer is the final layer of print, which is a digital wireframe that I drew in Illustrator. And this is a photograph of the ground, which is pinned up to my studio wall that I photographed and then ran through my printer. And I'll show you that piece in a minute when I do the little studio walk around.
Thank you, Colin.
Sure thing.
So whenever you're
So-
ready to go through the studio, I will spotlight you on the studio too. Colin, we can't hear you at this point. Hang on. Wait, Colin,
Can you
yeah,
hear me now?
hang on, and let me spotlight you. Okay, start again, please.
Okay, sure. So this is my workstation here, and this is a piece on the wall called Bow Tie. I believe it's from 2014, and it was created shortly after my wife and I have found out that she was pregnant with our daughter Aya. So this means bow tie means I believe womb in Japanese, and sort of the feeling was that here's these two sides, and then in the middle is this sort of abstract idea of, I guess, blood. You know, I never really thought of the literal interpretation, but sort of like what connects us. And then I just pulled this up on the screen. It's our YouTube channel. So for Techspressionism, there's a bunch of artist interviews, and we also conduct bi-weekly salons where about 30 or so artists from all around the world meet up to talk about ideas in the tradition of the artist salons of the past. So this is my printer here, which is an Epson 9800. It's an older machine that I purchased, actually refurbished when I got the Pollock and Krasner grant. And there's some recent paintings hanging here. This one's called Movement. And these are all acrylic on linen, about 3 by 4 foot. And this is that piece Invictus that I brought up on my machine. This is another piece that also was titled in relation to my father. It's called Dr. No. So he and I shared a love for James Bond movies, and this piece somehow made me think of that. A lot of times I think of my work as almost Rorschach blocks, or blots rather, in that the titles generally come after the work is completed, and then I sometimes abstract the title. Like this one is a piece on wood panel. It's gouache on a birch panel with a resin top coat, and it's called shakushu, which means tentacles in Japanese. And sometimes I use the Japanese word just so the title isn't quite so literal. And here's one of the wireframe drawings that I showed. This is so graphite on paper, pencil drawing. That piece was reproduced in the New York Times for a show at East End Arts Council a while back, I believe in 2011. And this is one of my most recent additions to the studio. It's a drawing machine, a plotter essentially, called an AxiDraw, and it allows you to mount standard drawing implements into it. Roman Verasco is one of the artists well known for plotter drawings. He's actually part of a movement called the Algorists, who used algorithms to create abstraction. And this is one of my first sort of experiments not using an algorithm. It was hand drawn in Illustrator, but kind of references graffiti art, and it's Sharpie on cardboard. So that's pretty much what I have going on in the studio right now. Happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Colin, thank you so much. I know I'm learning so much, and I'm sure everybody else is too. So we are happy to take questions, and you can put your question in the chat, and I will read the question to Colin and he will answer it. So let's see if there are any questions so far. Okay, we have a lot of different comments, and of course, Colin, many people express their condolences, and as I mentioned before, I can speak on behalf of the entire group that we really appreciate you doing this at this difficult time. And I think as adults, we know that that's not the easiest thing to do, so thank you. So question, what inspired you to acquire the plotter? Colin?
Did you want me to stop the video on the iPad? I'm not sure if I'm back in front of my machine
Okay,
now,
yeah,
so I don't know if you want
let
to
me
switch.
spotlight you. And I'll take the other one off. Perfect.
Gotcha. Okay. So the plotter, actually, you know, it was another artist that came into the Techspressionist group named Peter Bourget, who's based in Brooklyn. And I saw his work. He was one of the first artists to show up in the salons. And he actually modified a vinyl cutter to hold the drawing implement. And I was asking him about his practice and learned a little bit more about the AxiDraw. So I, you know, I got it as an experiment. I like to experiment with new technologies. Actually, behind me, I have an Oculus headset, which is a VR headset that I've been using to play around. I would call it playing around at this point with an app called Google Tilt Brush, which allows you to draw and paint in 3D space within a virtual environment. I wouldn't say that, you know, either the plotter or the tilt brush work is ever going to supplant painting for me. I mean, painting is really my love, and I primarily would consider myself a painter at this point, but I do like exploring new technologies, and certainly drawing is a big part of my work as well, because all of my painted work does incorporate drawn elements in terms of the digital overprint.
Leslie Lewitt says, is your work, and tell the truth, Colin, is your workspace always this clean?
No. Yeah, my wife gave me a gentle nudge this morning, like, you better clean the studio up. And actually behind me here is our daughter's you know, setup. So she's in the studio quite often, and she actually took the picture of me that was used in some of the promotional material for this event, where I'm standing in front of the two paintings. So she's a big part of my practice too.
Excellent. Okay, Patricia says, Colin, did you say you use white gesso on top of your prints before printing the photographic images?
Yeah, you know, I mean, basically, I would consider them paintings ultimately, but I do use gesso. This is a fairly new development in terms of knocking out the area that I'm going to print the photograph onto with gesso. A lot of times I would print that directly onto the painted surface, and it would be a lot more obscured. But for these particular pieces, I wanted to get a very clean print, and the white squares on those pieces in the COVID paintings are also hand painted in acrylic. And people have asked me, you know, is that a mistake? Is that a watermark? Why do you put those white squares on there? And, you know, I don't really know what they represent. I think maybe subconsciously I made 3 of them because it was my wife, my daughter, and myself, you know, going to get the tests done. I do like the juxtaposition of these sort of hard edge geometric elements against very gestural abstract painting. I think I just like the way that looks. And there was also another instructor who was a colleague of Roy Nicholson's at LIU named Yoshihiga, who was a photographer primarily. But I remember seeing his paintings one time, and they made a big impact on me in that they had very simple geometric forms in them, and they were very minimal. And I really never learned very much about his paintings, but I remember after seeing them, they stuck in my head as something really, visually compelling.
Well, that's a good point, Colin, because sometimes the artist, there's so many memories and influences and emotions, and you really don't know exactly why, but later you reflect on it, and then the viewer will bring his or her own interpretation. Like those boxes remind me of enclosure, during COVID, being contained. So, okay, so let's see. We have really good questions here. Well, this is technical. Do you put the actual paintings through the printer?
I do. Yeah. So I have the luxury of, owning my own hardware. But I did actually start with a much smaller printer. Like, I printed initially with it was an Epson 1280, I believe, which was a Super B format. So that's 13 by 19 sheets as a maximum size. And I really started by, I had just finished my MFA in computer art over at Bowling Green, and actually Patrick Lichty, who's a co-founder of the Techspressionism group, was another MFA computer art student in that program with me. That's how he and I met. And so prior to going to grad school is right around 2005 is when I started running paintings through my printer, and it was a smaller printer. But what I did was I actually removed a bunch of the parts because I noticed they were little roller wheels that were leaving tracks on the pieces. So I popped them out, and the printer seemed to work okay without them. And that's how that painting that's in the Pollock House collection was made, was on this sort of Frankenstein modified printer. But most printers now actually are pigment based. So I often tell people and artists who are interested in exploring digital mixed media that almost all printers at this point are technically archival. That is, dye-based printers have been phased out. And there's actually a primer called Ink Aid that's an extremely useful addition to the studio that allows you to print on almost any sort of material, including brown paper bag, for instance, or you can prime aluminum foil with it and run it through your printer and it'll print onto it.
Well, that's amazing. I have a question, Colin. Do you ever take the same image and then print it onto different paintings?
Generally not. I mean, most of the digital files that I create for paintings are singular. That is, a lot of times I don't even save the file, to be honest. Like I'll create something, run the print, and then just close it out. Sometimes, generally I do not reuse the same image when it comes to anything that's, actually that's not 100% true. There was a series of work that I did when I was in grad school in a graduate printmaking class where I created a bunch of digital images and turned them into silk screens in the darkroom, and then I printed them as unique works. That is, each screen print had a different original underpainting and was printed in like a different color. I tried metallics and other things that I couldn't really easily print digitally. So in that case, I did reuse the same composition, but each piece was still unique.
Thank you. We do have quite a few questions, so I'm going to see which ones are somewhat similar. Someone asked, what kind of emotions do you hope your works inspire in your viewers? I think you kind of answered that, but do you want to?
Honestly, I don't hope for any particular response. I'm interested in hearing the responses, but I feel like that's a personal reaction that is up to the viewer. But I do really find it interesting where people see things in the work that was not necessarily intentional. Like, do you mind if I just share my screen really quick? Because that just made me
No,
think of
not at all.
something. Um, so, so there's a series of pieces that I have. Let me see if I can pull up a browser here. So the first real digital drawings that I did were back in '99. I started. They're called I called them my Metagraph series, because to me, the actual art is not the output. It's not the printed manifestation. It's the digital drawing itself, which is code essentially. These are all drawn in Illustrator, and you can actually open the files up in a text editor and see the code, which was originally an EPS file for each one of these drawings. This was done in '99. But the thing that made me want to bring this up is that there's a particular piece in this series, this one, which when I drew it, it was untitled. And more than one person actually said to me, is that the Virgin Mary? And I thought, no, but it just struck me as very strange that such a specific reference, would be derived from this. And that's something that always interests me about abstract art is what people see in it, and just the fact that that the title ended up being kneeling icon, because of the idea of a religious icon, but it just really was something that made me stop and like take notice, like that there would be that identification.
Well, that's a good point. By the way, for everybody who's on here, April 6th, we're going to have an event, virtual from the Pollock House called The Creative Mind. And I'm going to go into detail about this idea of interpreting art and how to get people to have, express open-ended ideas about interpretation and some research that's been done about it. And so it's going to be a little more focused on the viewer as well as the art maker. So you can come back for that one. So let's see, we have so many good questions here. Michael says, is the linen you work on printer ready, or do you have to prepare the surface in some way?
No, it is primed. I use a brand called Senso, Senso, which you can buy online. I buy it in a roll. It's primed with clear gesso, and it's fairly thin compared to a lot of other linens, so I can run it through the printer pretty easily. But generally, I do also use this primer ink aid as a top coat, especially when there's painting on top of it. So ink aid is sort of like something that I use in between before I print. I'll prime it again with ink aid, with clear ink aid, and then a lot of times after I print, I'll spray it with like a Krylon mat or something like that to prevent any of the ink from smudging if I then paint back into it. And like I said, most of my work at this point involves multiple passes through the printer. So it's a fairly complicated process. And sometimes there's a screw up, and it jams in the printer or it doesn't print well. And one benefit of using multiple layers of primer is if I'm quick enough, I can actually wipe down the surface of the painting and remove the print, and try it again. If I wait too long and it dries, that's not going to work. But
well, thank you for sharing all your secrets. No, I'm just kidding. No, I knew there was going to be a lot of questions. These are all good questions, so I'm trying to group some of them together because there's so many. What is wireframe drawing?
So wireframe is really a reference to CAD drawing, which is like computer aided design. So a lot of that derives history from engineering drawings and basically 3D models. A wireframe is kind of a way of showing a 3D form in a kind of skeletal way. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll make a mark. I use this Wacom drawing tablet for all my compositions. So I draw on the tablet. A lot of times I'll make a mark, like a gestural mark, and then I rotate it in space within a vector-based drawing program, generally Adobe Illustrator. which I've been using for, since the 90s. And that's been my primary compositional tool. And the reason I work with Illustrator primarily versus something like Photoshop is because it's what's called vector-based drawing. So vector-based drawing defines each line and form and shape mathematically versus as a grid of pixels. So with something in Photoshop, you zoom in it far enough and then you see pixelation. You can't print it beyond a certain size. Whereas things that are drawn in vector, like that kneeling icon, for instance, could literally be printed, the size of a billboard, and it would still be crystal clear because everything is basically defined mathematically.
Thank you. Joshua says, what new technologies excite you the most that you'd like to explore, and which ones do you fear? Like that question.
I think that actually, and I'll share, I'll do a screen share while I'm explaining this too again. So one thing that I think is really exciting right now is this phenomenon of crypto art and NFTs, which stands for non-fungible tokens. And this is of something that's literally was just in the New York Times like this past weekend, where artists have basically been working with blockchain technology, like what drives Bitcoin, to allow digital creations to be truly unique. That is, a digital piece can be verified to be owned by a particular collector, and it can then be resold in a way that digital art never has been able to be done before. So this piece is a piece called Urbanite, which is one of my vector-based digital drawings. So it loops basically. It's a 23-second loop, and I often use numbers that are significant to me in my work as well. I was born on the 23rd. My daughter was actually also born on the 23rd, on 6/23, June 23rd at 6/23. So that's a very significant number for me, and I kind of like incorporate numerology in some ways in my work in terms of the numbers that I select. But NFTs and crypto art would be my answer to both questions. What am I most excited about, and what am I most afraid of? Afraid of because well, I don't really know if it's fear, but I think that there's going to be a big, and there has been a big sort of like reaction against this new sort of phenomenon in the art world of crypto art. That is, a lot of people are saying it's not art or it's not valid, which are all the same things that people have been saying about technology-based work since people started doing it. So yeah, I wouldn't say that there's anything I particularly fear about technology based art, other than it'll, suck in my attention and prevent me from doing much else with my life.
But you know what, Colin? That's an interesting point you just brought up, because look, the Impressionist artists were told that's not art. Van Gogh was told that's not art. Pollock, certain people said that's not art. So change can be very difficult for, change challenges the status quo. So we're so used to thinking of art as something that's handmade. So that's why I love this talk. It makes us question.
And, honestly, I would say that if I'm drawing with my hand on a tablet to make that digital drawing that then became an animation, I mean, to me, that's still handmade.
Absolutely. In your case, you have both, actually. Yeah, you have your actual mark, and then you have the digital or the technological aspect. Now, we have so many different questions here. I always like to have, in addition to the questions, because a lot of them are actually very technical, but I would like to take some time to hear from some of the participants, because I know we have some Techspressionists out there. So is there anyone who would like to share as a Techspressionist, like for about 1 minute, and tell us about what you're working on, or maybe you have something in your house that's behind you, or anybody who would like to actually share something of your creative process to bring this full circle, because we have people from all over the world, which is great. So if you would like to share, you can put a little hand up in the chat. I mean, in the participants. Well, you know what? I think I'm easier for me to do it in the chat. Oh, I see somebody's hand. Okay, good. So who is that? I don't usually do it this way. You'll have to excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm having a technological moment. If you want to share, can you just please write in the chat, I'd like to share, and your name will come up really quickly. Oh, here we go. I'd be happy to share. I'm gonna, Colin, can you see the chat? Would you like to call on people? Or I don't want to put you on the spot, then maybe other people are gonna get mad at you.
I see, like in the order that I saw the hands go up, I see Roz, Darcy, and Tommy.
Perfect. Okay. And I do ask everybody to be brief, so I'm going to time it. Okay. So go ahead. You call on the person and then I'll do the screen share.
Actually, I see Diane first. Diane Marcella.
I mean the spotlight. I'll do the spotlight. Nice to see you. Unmute, please.
Unmuted. Okay. Hey, I'm thrilled to be here. I got involved with the Techspressionists a few months ago. Delighted to meet everybody because I started thinking that there wasn't anybody out there doing what I was doing, and nobody really understood it. They liked it, but they didn't really get it. So I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. Please forgive me. This is my first time doing this. So can you let me know if you see that image?
Yes, we can see it. We can see it.
Great, great.
And
all right. Well, this.
Yeah, just like 30 seconds left.
Yep,
Okay?
I'll go through them quickly. These are kind of in chronological order. All of my images are based on photos that I've taken of something that I thought was interesting. And as I only use Photoshop, and as I go through the image, kind of like the other artists we spoke about earlier, I don't have a title in mind. I sort of let the piece do what it's going to do, and then a title sort of comes to, depending on my mood. Of course, with this summer, well, the awful things that were happening in this country, some of my stuff became very, I don't know if you'd say angry, but angry. Nero, fiddling while the country burns. And then there's hope. Once the election hit, I was a little bit of a happier person.
Diane, that's time.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to thank you for sharing, because this is really good. It's bringing it full circle. So Colin, can you call on the next person?
Sure. And, I would say this is something from our salons. Diane, if you want to paste your web link into the chat, then people could follow up and look at your work. And this goes for anyone else that presents. So next up is Roz.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I don't think I'm going to share a screen, but I have a piece behind me that's one of my digital paintings. And I just want to say, being part of Techspressionism as an artist who was a painter, traditional painter who got accidentally involved in digital art, by just responding to a world of pixels, everything started filling with pixels. Being part of this new movement after 30 years of working in this medium, and it's been exciting all along, but I think we're at a second sort of movement that I relate to the 1990s of the .com, when things were really exploding and ideas were being shared. And I love this Techspressionism a lot for the community and the sharing and the learning, because yes, we work in our own islands, but I think a new form of rather artist atelier is forming in a way that is collaborative and almost like a movie director working with different images. And there's just an explosion of ideas going on and a real seriousness as to art. And I think Techspressionism, I'm excited about it. So I just wanted to say that. I appreciate that Colin has taken the helm and kind of geared this and he's directing it, but he's very open and that's really been exciting. And I encourage you to go and hear some of the interviews that we have online. That's where you really get an in-depth look at what artists are doing. I'm in one of them, and I've interviewed 2 other people, including Colin. And I invite you all to go to Techspressionism, Techspressionist on YouTube. And thank you. Thanks, Colin. And thank you to the Jackson Pollock House and Helen Harrison, and to you, Joyce, as well. This has been great.
Thank you for sharing. I love
Thanks,
seeing, this is so good to bring this full circle. So Colin, will you call on the next person?
Sure. Darcy?
Hi. Let me bring up a screen share here. I have for the last number of years been painting in a virtual world with tilt brush, which I like a lot. And these paintings actually all exist
Wait,
as
oh,
well
there
as
you- Speak
I
a
love
little
living-
louder, Darcy. Speak up a little, please.
Okay, let me see if
Yeah,
I can.
great. Very good.
Can you hear me better now?
A little bit, yeah. Go, these are amazing. Go ahead.
So I paint all these in a virtual world with tilt brush. They're all on canvas. I loved listening to Colin talk about all the ways he experiments with getting his work into a physical medium. That has been one of the big efforts of my working with this technology, because in the beginning, there were works just on screens. And you can see I've incorporated a real picture here with digital imagery as well. And so I think that's one of the things that maybe is part of what we can do. We can go in and out of the computer, in and out of physical media, and make artworks that way, which is really pretty fun. This is what a new way I have found of being able to actually look at artwork.
Yeah, explain.
So this would be a painting I would paint in tilt brush. I call them 3D light sculptures. Around the periphery of this world in Alt Space VR, you can see billboard-sized paintings. And I invite you all to come here. You can come here as an avatar. You can fly around in these light sculptures like this. And it's a new way, kind of experiencing artworks.
That's fascinating. That's really brings a whole other aspect to this. Can you put the info in the chat, please, Darcy? And thank you so much. Those works are stunning. We're going to go on to the next person, but the colors are just spectacular. So I want to make sure most
think
people get a chance.
Tommy,
Thank
I
you,
see.
Darcy. We didn't hear that.
Tommy Mintz, I think, is the next one I see in the chat after Darcy.
That was very nice.
I think you can hear me now. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I have a print behind me that I'd like to share. It's an image that I generated with an algorithm that analyzes a sequence of images and determines areas that have changed, something that's different, creates what I consider a time-lapse collage. This is printed dye sublimation on aluminum. It's a particularly exciting way to sort of bring into material form these digital creations. And if I still have time, I'd like to just share with you some recent work that I've been making using, and here's my software. It's freely available on GitHub if you're into Python. And it's called the Automated Digital Photo Collage. And here's some recent collages. What I do is I go around, take a series of images, trying to keep the camera quite still. Sometimes I have it on a tripod, sometimes I don't. And when I don't, the slight edge shift between my sort of wavering hands shows up in very interesting ways. And I've been fascinated by that recently. So what I do is I take a sequence of pictures, and actually I can show you maybe a folder of work in process here. Here's some photos of a location, and I actually run them through Photoshop to align them using align layer algorithm. And then I run them through my algorithm that generates layer masks, which are the areas of difference. So everything that's white gets laid in and becomes part of the collage, which is the output. And so I get this ever increasing sort of layering of moments of time, which I think is a very digital expression, if you will. So
Really,
thank you for your attention.
thank you so much. That's so fascinating. Really, that's a clear example of technology, kind of a high-end understanding of technology. It seemed complicated to me. And coming together with also your artistic vision. It's like the intuitive brain and the analytical brain.
I like that. Thank you.
I mean, unbelievable, really. Very good.
There's a lot of great work here today. Really, this
A
is
lot of great
I
work.
feel flattered to be in this
So,
crowd.
Colin, can you call on someone else?
Sure. There's one more person that I see. I just wanted to say one thing really quick too in relation to Tommy's work. Like, I think that the sort of basis of Techspressionism from a definition standpoint is like this idea of expression of emotional content. And I think a lot of the people see the work in some way, or even the artists themselves see it as process driven or sort of process oriented. But I think it's really hard to know, I think even from a first person standpoint, what the work is about, like as far as like an emotional litmus test of where the artist is at when it's created. So it's hard to say, like by looking at an image, if there's emotional intent there or what that is. So it's tough for me sometimes as a curator when I'm picking work for the feed, for instance, to know, like, is this work that's just about an optical effect, or is it about an emotional state? And really, like, all work is about an emotional state. So I just wanted to put that out there, and because who is it, who is a curator or is someone external from the artist to really say what the intentionality is? To me, that's up to interpretation. So again, like, I look at Tommy's work and there's a very specific technical programmatic explanation, and probably almost nobody in this room knows even what Python is. I certainly don't code in it, but I know enough to know it's a coding language. But I think that what the work is about, it might have been where your head was at that day, or what you were thinking about, or what made you take that image of that particular street corner or something like that. So anyway, that's my little kind of 2 cents on.
Can I just pick up on that, Colin? Because that's exactly what happens. I think now, as I go out taking pictures with the algorithm and its interpretation in mind. So I go out sort of with the digital in my mind as I'm out there photographing.
Gotcha. And I'm sure there is a personal meaning to those specific locations or something that's going on with you in relation to that spot. So people might see it and say, well, that's like some cool, like Photoshop style effect, but that's not necessarily what the work is about. And I just wanted to put that out there because that's a common way that I think people look at digital work on a very surface level, and that's really what I'm trying to open people's minds up to, is that, that's a very surface way of looking at any kind of art. It's like saying, well, Jackson Pollock, he just dripped stuff on a canvas, and let's leave it at that, you know.
And even just to bring it back to the history, like Andy Warhol, his Campbell's soup cans, they seem kind of deadpan, right? It's a soup can. It's a manufactured object. But yet, if we talk about expression, it maybe wasn't his intent, but it's very highly nostalgic for people my age when you see a Campbell's soup can, right? It brings back memories. It brings back your mother serving Campbell soup. So it's not, Jackson Pollock it's when we talk about memory and emotion, and it's much broader than just letting your emotions out with dripping paint. It's much more complex. That's why I like this talk, because it raises a lot of good questions instead of narrowing it down. So
And certainly Pollock's work wasn't about dripping paint. It was about what was going on with him, which was probably a lot of times, he was intoxicated or going through some sort of crazy emotional crisis or whatever was happening with him.
He wasn't intoxicated, just for the point of he didn't drink and paint at the same time. But anyway,
okay.
But it does also, it spoke to the whole time he was living in, all the troubles with World War II and post-World War II and so on. I'll tell you what, we have one more minute, and this conversation is so good, but I do have to stop at 5. So why don't we just take one really quick share, okay? And then
there's
we'll
Verneda Lights is the last one that I see on there.
So where is Verneda?
Verneda, are you in here?
Yes, I'm here.
Verneda, go ahead.
I have a, okay. Hold on a second, please.
We're getting feedback.
I know, I'm trying to stop it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I think I have that here.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh,
We're
no.
getting feedback.
Oh,
Okay.
go ahead and
We're gonna have to move
go to
on.
someone else.
I'm so sorry, but thank you so much. And that's technological difficulty. So we're gonna mute everybody. Now, I see amazing friends on the call. I see amazing artists whose names I recognize, and I see a lot of people would like to go further with this discussion. So, Colin, can you tell people how they can get more information, and what, is there a qualification to get into the group, or anything you want to share to wrap up? And I will also tell everybody on behalf of the Pollock House, and let me mute everybody again. What's going on here? Okay, let me pin myself. This is our Creative Intention series. So we have guest speakers virtually connected to different themes relating to abstract expressionism. So the next one, which I think is going to be incredible, is the creative mind. And we have Norman Brosterman, who wrote a book about the history of kindergarten and its impact on specific modern artists. He links back Kandinsky's abstraction to the fact that he went to kindergarten. So that one is going to be specifically about, can you teach creativity? And we're going to have different speakers and so on. I'm going to be one of them because I also I'm considered an expert in how to teach visual literacy. So we're gonna discuss that in more depth. So check back with pkhouse.org. And Colin, so what would you like to wrap up? Of course, we want to thank Colin, virtual clap. Thank you. And what closing thoughts, Colin?
Sure. So I would say, if you're interested in Techspressionism, well, my own site is just goldberg.art. I have a mailing list on there, so you could always sign up for that if you want to find out more about where I'm showing personally. And then with regards to Techspressionism, there's also Techspressionism.com is the website. There's a mailing list on there where if you sign up for the mailing list, then you'll get notified how to access the Zoom salon. And at this point, the Zoom salon is open also to non-artists, to just people who want to sit in and check out the conversation. The way that as an artist you can get involved the best way is to use the hashtag Techspressionism when you're posting your work to Instagram. And I basically on a daily basis, look through a hashtag search and just repost interesting work using the hashtag to our account, which is at Techspressionism on Instagram, into the story. And then each day there's actually a featured artist on the Techspressionism Instagram where I post 3 of their images, and those artists are all going to be, we're going to be selecting from our artist index for an upcoming juried show that we're going to be hosting on Techspressionism.com using Kunstmatrix, which is a German VR platform that we're technology partners with.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Sorry we couldn't get to everybody, and thank you again to Colin. This was so breathtaking, visually as well as intellectually, for me. I mean, it just sparked my creative, it opened up my mind. So stay safe, everybody, stay happy, and nice to meet our new Zoom friends. So good night, everybody, depending on where you are.